he told me his story of fleeing Eritrea, across Sudan, across the Sahara Desert into Libya, Mediterranean Sea. And so I thought, you have to be the only person who's ever done this before. There are a little over 30 million refugees. You have around 126 million displaced people in the world. In fiscal year 2024, there are around 14,000 people who are resettled in California. We are a nonprofit social enterprise using the power of the coffee industry to help people find jobs, to get a life started here.
I just think it's really cool that 1951 Coffee, this space kind of opened up.
Right.
When things like that happen, how can you not see that as the universe literally being like, here you go, like this is meant to be.
I think it's just like remaining clear on what your purpose is, but remain flexible in how you get there.
Hello, welcome to Founders of Impact. This is a spin-off series of Miller Center's Line of Sight podcast. My name is Karen Rundy. I'm one of the directors here at Miller Center. And today I am really excited because we are talking to CEO and co-founder of 1951 Coffee Company. And as you can see, we are physically where?
We're in our cafe in Berkeley.
Doug, thank you so much for having us here. Yeah. First of all, I really love the name because I feel like it's such a great homage to the refugee movement and acknowledgement of its status. And so I was wondering if you could first tell us the story behind the name of 1951 Coffee.
For sure. 1951 Coffee Company is named after the 1951 Refugee Conventions. Coming out of World War II, there were a lot of kind of global recognitions that things needed to be done differently. There needed to be more global cooperation. So not shortly before the 1951 Refugee Convention, the United Nations was founded. One of the key things that they were looking at was how to protect people fleeing war, conflict, and violence, because there were not protections during World War II, and people would flee across international borders and immediately be pushed back into conflict zones. So the 1951 Refugee Convention focused on setting guidelines and international laws and protections for people fleeing war, conflict, and violence. And of course, the convention happened in 1951 in Geneva, Switzerland. But at the same time, it produced a document that undergirds all of the legal protection of refugees today called the 1951 Refugee Convention.
I could talk about this all day because in grad school, I learned about like Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this is one of the articles from that declaration that just goes really deep into refugee status and acknowledging the rights of refugees and just basic human rights. Anyways, that's like a whole other tunnel, but before we get into all of that, I wanted to zoom out. And then if you could maybe just talk briefly about, well, we know the title and the name, but what does 1951 do? What is your company all about?
Right. So we are a nonprofit social enterprise working with refugees and other humanitarian immigrants to the United States, using the power of the coffee industry to help people find jobs, to get a life started here in the U.S. And so we do that through offering free barista training to people who are referred to us. And then we help them find jobs after the completion of that. We have a cafe that we run ourselves here in Berkeley. And so this cafe we've been running since 2017. So we're able to hire people who complete our training here. And then in addition to that, we also have built out a network of other coffee companies, from the coffee roasting facilities, coffee warehouses, to cafes that will also work with us and hire people who completed our program.
I mean, you just said a lot there. I think you're just tackling so many things. Well, first of all, you guys started in 2015.
Yes.
Is that right? And then you launched this cafe in 2017, which I believe was right after President Trump's inauguration.
The first inauguration,
and all these travel bans happened. So in a way, it was kind of like having something like this exist really proves how much this is needed this time in this current political climate. How are you navigating the political situation? I think there's a whole other, tariff situation going on with coffee. You're kind of at the nexus of a lot of these huge geopolitical movements. But how is that? How are you? What's going on?
You're right. And, working in the refugee and immigrant space right now is a difficult place to work. You have people, communities that are being threatened. Refugee programs are largely shut down, and new refugees are not being allowed to enter the country and brought into the country. However, at the same time, there are over 2 million people who are still waiting to go through the asylum process here. California is a huge place for people who are waiting to go through the asylum process. And so while programs are shut down, funding is very, very short for a lot of our partners who are working in refugee assistance. We have a waiting list for our training classes that we offer. People who are still looking for ways to, through employment, connect to the heart of American life and American culture. And the coffee industry still provides that.
Right.
At the same time, the coffee industry, through the effects of climate change, which are completely separate from some of the current political climate.
It's all interconnected though.
It is very much so.
Yeah.
Already prices because of that were beginning to increase. But then when you add to that potential for tariffs and things like that, I know there's been a big push in the coffee industry to push for exceptions for coffee being brought in, because we cannot grow coffee here in the United States other than Puerto Rico and Hawaii. There are some real things to think about and consider. Right now, the sharpest edge of all of these challenges has not deeply affected us yet, but at the same time, it is something that we have to continue to monitor, something we have to continue to be aware of. And especially to continue to make this an affordable space for our customers to come to, but also a safe space for our staff and for those who are helping to start a new life.
Can you give us some numbers? Like how many refugees are there worldwide? And then if we could zoom in just in California, what is that percentage?
There are 30 million, a little over 30 million refugees or refugee type populations around the world. But those are very specifically people who are displaced by war, conflict, and violence and have crossed international borders. Right. When you expand that out to people who have had to flee their homes because of that, but still may be in their country of origin, you have around 126 million displaced people in the world, which is a little less than a third of the U.S. population. So when you think about that in context, there's a lot of displaced people around the world. And California typically is either first or second when it comes to refugee resettlement in the United States. In fiscal year 2024, there are around 14,000 people who are resettled in California. And that's just people who are refugees, special immigrant visa holders. That doesn't include the large asylum population that will often have their cases processed in California as well.
Wow. I was watching one of your videos and it was highlighting some of your employees at 1951 Coffee, and it was quite diverse. Like there was some folks from Syria, from Iran, Afghanistan, Bhutan. Is there a majority of refugees or people going through resettlement process from a certain specific country, like here specifically in California, or is it really?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Here in the Bay Area, I mean, one, California, the Bay Area, extremely diverse already. Our programming, we've worked with people from over 50 different countries throughout our programming, nearly 500 people. So basically 1 out of every 10 people is from a different place, right? However, we can say there are definitely trends. The majority of people who go through our program are from East Africa, Eritrea or Ethiopia. And then the next largest group would be people from Afghanistan. So for a long time, Fremont, California, which is just south of here, was one of the largest groups of Afghan people outside of Afghanistan. So we still have a very large Afghan population and continues to grow here in the Bay Area. And then after that, people from Guatemala, and then other people from mainly Central America, some from South America as well, but mainly Central America.
So currently, how many folks are, well, I guess it's 2 questions. How many people are actually working at 1951? And then how many are currently going through your training, your barista training? Currently,
we have 15 people working at our cafe. Those are a mixture of full-time and part-time positions. Some people have been here quite a while. Some people are very, very new. We have a person who's worked 3 shifts, and we have a person who's been here with us almost 6 years now. So we have a wide range within that. In addition to that, so when we're thinking about our barista training program, every year we have 65 people who go through that program. 40 people go through the adult program, which very specifically focuses on learning the barista skills to immediately be able to get a job. We also have just this year started a youth program. The youth program focuses on high school age youth or opportunity youth. So here in the Bay Area, some people can stay into high school up until 24. So it's 15 to 24 years old. And it allows people to learn all the basics of being a barista. So if they are looking for a job, they can immediately apply it to a part-time job or something while they're in school. But it also, within that group, a lot of people come from coffee producing countries. And it provides an opportunity for them to see that they may have a potential future in the expansive coffee industry here in the Bay Area and in California based off of life skills that they have and experiences they have from their home countries that could be actually very valuable for the coffee industry here. So it's a little bit more of like planting the seeds of what could be possible for these high school students as they are evaluating their futures going forward.
There's something just so beautiful about your choice of using a cafe as a
Hmm.
place for training and integration and honestly cultural integration. Because
Hmm.
you just said, like Eritrea, for example, has a very beautiful coffee culture
Yes.
and acknowledging that
Right.
and then integrating it within this culture that you've
Right.
created. I feel like that's, well, I'm sure that's very intentional on your
Hmm.
part.
It is. It is. Very much
Just
so.
talking about the cafe culture and like,
Hmm.
what is that culture that you're trying to cultivate here?
Yeah, I think, it actually begins with our training class. One of the first lessons that we teach in the adult or youth training class is the history of coffee. And we want to remind people that, while coffee is seen as a very American thing by Americans,
Right.
it is actually extremely international. A lot of what we embrace, from cafe culture to the way that we make our coffee, very little of it actually started here in the US.
Very true.
Coffee
Yeah.
originally is from Ethiopia. Coffee farms and the beverage are from Yemen. Coffee house culture comes from the Middle East, from places like Medina and Mecca and Cairo and Damascus. And almost all of the machines that we use for making espresso are from Italy. There's so many layers. In addition to, say, the vast majority of coffee even today is grown outside of the United States,
Yeah.
and all imported into the US,
Right.
with distinct cultural backgrounds, ways of making coffee.
Right.
And so I think we're trying to provide a place that is at the heart of American culture, but is very open to that international influence, and a place where people can come and not just be, consumers
Right.
or just be customers on the periphery of an industry,
Yeah.
but actually can come into an industry and be co-creators along with Americans of building a
100%.
culture that is increasingly beautiful because of the opportunity to bring that diversity in.
I mean, kudos to you and your co-founder, Rachel, for being so prescient and
Mhm.
thinking through that model because obviously it works. And I think you guys have just set up such a model of success for that kind of cultural integration. And I also want to acknowledge where you're physically based because
Mhm.
I think that also plays a part.
Yeah.
So we are literally like within the UC Berkeley kind of campus
Yeah,
culture, like the
we are.
dorms are like right there.
Yep.
And I don't know if you want to talk about UC Berkeley, but like,
Sure, of course.
the political activist culture of UC
Right.
Berkeley is
Right.
it's very much a thing. I just think it makes a lot of sense that you guys are here within
Mhm.
this kind of college climate. So
Right.
I don't know if you can
Yeah,
it.
I mean, when we were looking for commercial spaces, we didn't necessarily pick this space in particular. It's like, we have to be near UC Berkeley on the south side of campus. And this space became available to us through the people here at First Presbyterian Church, and they had a space that they made available to us. But it actually has been really, really good for it to be next to UC Berkeley. We're 2 blocks south of campus, 2 blocks south of Sproul Plaza, which is kind of like a historic place
Yeah.
within activism, not just
Yeah.
in California, but in the whole United States.
100%.
And to be that close, to be wedged between 2 freshman dorms, you have students who need coffee to be able to study and stay awake through their studies. And so it definitely helps with business, but we're also working with a group of people who are coming in from all over the world to study here at UC Berkeley. And it, for many of us, when you're in college, it's that one time where you just really open your mind up and you're exploring and you're thinking about things and you're wrestling through concepts and ideas that will shape the way you see the world and affect the world in the future. And so for us, it actually is really important that we're able to work alongside students to infuse their learning with the knowledge of who refugees are, what refugees are going through, while they're in that stage of thinking about and shaping the world for the future, and including refugees as a part of that thought process and that story.
Yeah. It's funny. So UC Berkeley is kind of near and dear to my heart. I come from a long line of UC Berkeley grads. Actually, both my grandfathers went here, my dad went here, and I just kind of grew up ingrained with like the UC Berkeley culture of activism. Like I remember my dad saying his college graduation was canceled because of the Vietnam protests. So I just think it's really cool that 1951 coffee is here, and it kind of, as you said, it that wasn't the intention. It like by serendipity, like this space kind of opened up. When things like that happen, it's like, how can you not see that as like the universe, like literally being like, here you go, like this is meant to be.
So yeah,
I just think that that's such a beautiful, it's like just a beautiful way that this cafe has evolved and like grown so organically. So that's a little bit about Berkeley. So you're not originally from here, right? You're from Tennessee. You've been here for a while. What brought you from Tennessee to California?
So I actually came here to study for my graduate degree, for a master's in intercultural studies. So that brought me to California in 2007. And honestly, I actually probably thought that I would finish graduate school, go work outside the US, and, didn't really know exactly where. I'd spent some time living in different places outside the country, but I ended up staying here in the Bay Area. Been here ever since, doing, work with refugees and working coffee. Yeah.
Where else did you live and study?
Well, I spent some time when I was in college, summers in the UK, and then took a semester off, was in West Africa and Senegal for about 4 months, and then spent 2 years in China studying Mandarin Chinese and teaching English, and then came back to California. So it wasn't just Tennessee to California.
Got it. A little bit of a journey. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool that you taught English too. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
And then I also saw, did you get your master's in theology?
I did, yeah. Yeah, Master's of Divinity as well. So the program that I participated in here was a dual master's program. So there was a university in Tennessee that was teaching their Master's in Intercultural Studies at a seminary campus out here in order to be in a much more diverse area. So while I was doing my Master's in Intercultural Studies, I also simultaneously went ahead and did my Master's in Divinity as well.
I feel like that could go in so many ways. Was that pastoral studies or what is it, hermeneutics?
A lot of different things. So it could be pastoral studies. I mean, people can use it in a whole variety of different things. There were a large number of people that I, was studying alongside of that they were just doing it for their own personal knowledge to, help their understanding of how they understand God and how they see, the world through that lens. But, for me, it was something that was deeply personal to me to grow and understand my faith. But very early on in that process, I realized that working inside the normal church structure would not be where I was headed. I think especially once I met someone who was an asylum seeker working at a job while I was in graduate school, and hearing his story really gave me the path for my life, even at that point going through graduate school. So,
yeah. I remember you talking about that pivotal moment. Like you said, you were working in a cafe, you met a colleague that was from, I think, Eritrea. Yes. And that was the first time you got your eyes open to the journey of a refugee. Yeah.
So, I had heard, about people, seeking political asylum, and had heard about, people being refugees and seen, news footage of refugee camps. But I didn't really know much about the process of refugees coming to the United States and what that looked like in the refugee resettlement system and any of those things. And so when, I was hired to work at this cafe, around the same time that I was hired, there was someone who was hired to work there too. And we became really good friends. We played soccer together. And just one day in the conversation, I asked him, how did you come to the United States? How did you come to the Bay Area? And he told me his story of fleeing Eritrea, across Sudan, across the Sahara Desert into Libya, Mediterranean Sea. And he's telling me this whole story. And I think in my mind at that time, my naive understanding of that process, I thought, you have to be the only person who's ever done this before. This is unbelievable to see how many years and how many steps you had to go through to make it to this point, to work the same job that I'm working at roughly the same age with the same life and interests that we have now. But you came to this through such a different path. And as I got to know him more and his community more, realizing that, there are millions of people around the world who are following similar paths, whether it's to the US, to Europe, to different places to find that same safety. That he was looking for. So in the process of getting to know him and learning more within my master's program about the world and the global landscape, I began to realize this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed to be involved in here in the United States, being on this side to hopefully provide a better welcome for people that are having to take this arduous, long, dangerous journey to get here to the US.
Oh my gosh. So that's so deep and so just really amazing that it took one conversation you had with this one person that you happened to be working with, and that immediately, well, maybe it was immediately you just kind of knew, like, this is what I need to, this was my purpose, basically. So what were the kind of immediate next steps once you had that spark?
I think the first thing for me was to explore opportunities. I mean, obviously, I knew my friend and I knew his community, but to get more directly involved in the resettlement process. And so I began to do some research around, and I heard about an organization here in the Bay Area called the International Rescue Committee. Reached out to them, and they had some volunteer opportunities. And so the first thing I did was be what they call a family mentor to 3 Iraqi refugees. In essence, really, it was just to be an American friend to them, to help them navigate this new space that they were beginning to call home. Work on a little bit of English, conversational English here and there, navigate different challenges, finding certain things at grocery stores and navigating the Bay Area. So that's kind of where I started and got involved. And I just think every kind of step of the way, there were just more confirmations of this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is where I'm supposed to be plugged in.
Yeah. And then it was at the IRC that you met your co-founder, right? Rachel.
Yep.
So how did that relationship merge?
Yeah. So actually, while I was a volunteer at the International Rescue Committee, I actually applied a number of times to get a job there and didn't get an interview. I think partially it was because I was volunteering outside of the office, not in the office.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I actually had gotten to the point where I was teaching an English class for the International Rescue Committee, and Rachel had become the volunteer coordinator. And so in her due diligence, she's like, I should go and meet all the volunteers. And so one day she showed up to our English class and she just like, this is amazing. Like what you all are doing with this English class and offering it free of charge to all of the clients coming through the National Rescue Committee. Oh. And I just kind of like took that opportunity to be like, hey, I've been applying for a few jobs. Is there a way to like, kind of get past the application phase and get to an interview phase? And she's like, we have an opening right now for an employment specialist. Apply and I'll make sure and get your name in the interview pool. And so I did. I got an interview and ended up getting the job to work there as an employment specialist. And so that was the first time that I met Rachel, first opportunity. She kind of got me into this work in a professional sense. And then, Rachel and I became really good friends through our work. She was always kind of more on the volunteer coordinating, development, fundraising side of what we're doing. I was always on the program, direct service side of things, which actually proved really well in our next phase of work after that. But her husband also came and was volunteering at the International Rescue Committee. And so I knew both of them, very, very well. Yeah. And in 2015, both of us were kind of at like different points where we were going to be leaving our work at the International Rescue Committee. She had a second child and was kind of like considering different things. And I was ready to continue to work professionally in refugee resettlement, but was wanting to shift a little further outside of the U.S. government funded programming to provide some additional sources or resources that I saw were kind of missing and fill in some gaps. And so Rachel was like, hey, I hear you're leaving the National Rescue Committee. Let's like meet up for lunch someday. I just want to hear what you're thinking. And so one of the ideas I floated was, potential of like starting a cafe to be, a place of employment and welcome for refugees. And a week later, she, calls me back and she's like, hey, my husband and I have been talking about this. We really like this idea. Do you really want to do that? I'm willing to like partner with you and make this a reality.
That's amazing. And then you were saying that Rachel was going to this.
Yeah, she was attending First Presbyterian Church at the time when we began the process of looking for a space and just seeing if an idea could become reality. And interestingly enough, in May of 2015, we had decided that practically it was not possible. It was too expensive to pay commercial rents and to do what we wanted to do. And a week later, a friend of hers who was also going here to First Presbyterian Church was like, hey, there is this space available that the church would be willing to make available to you all to start your cafe and start your organization if you all want to come and look at it and talk about it. And so that was literally a week after we had decided this is not going to happen. It's not going to work. It's not practical. A door opened and we were able to walk through it. And that was May 2015, and here we are, 2025 still. Still going.
I love hearing stories like that because like, how can you not deny like this was the universe literally opening a door for you and saying this needs to happen. There's too many things that just lined up for you guys. So then, so that was 2015, and then I want to go up a few more years to when Miller Center first met you. So you and Rachel went through our 2018 accelerator cohort. And that was a really special cohort because that was the first time that Miller Center did a custom cohort. It was called the Social Entrepreneurs at the Margins cohort, specifically focusing on enterprises that focus refugees, survivors of human trafficking, displaced folks. So you guys are really part of like a very new thing that we were trying to support. And the fact that you had been operating since 2015 just shows how prescient I think you and Rachel were, because you saw like, hey man, there's a real need here to provide this kind of a service for this specific community. So I guess when you went through that 2018 cohort with us, what were you grappling with at the time? And what were your kind of big takeaways from being a part of the accelerator?
I think for us, as I mentioned before, my work when I worked at the International Rescue Committee, and even prior to that, like I had worked in cafes. I had worked in the coffee industry. I worked at a coffee consulting company for a year. I had worked on the programmatic side, things at the International Rescue Committee. Rachel worked on development, kind of back end, fundraising, those kind of things. Neither of us had a business degree or business background. And here we are running a social enterprise that not only has what we call a double bottom line, right? You have your missional bottom line of we must be missionally successful. However, at the same time, we must run this as an excellent business in order to make sure that we have what we need to do our mission, right? And so for us, it was the first opportunity for us to be able to invest in ourselves as entrepreneurs. In the actual technical sense.
Totally.
We understood our mission quite well. We understood the targets we wanted to hit, but we really, really needed to understand how do we set the business structure up for all of the potential growth that we could have in the future. And so I think being able to go through that program allowed us to have access to people and a group of individuals, whether it was professors or the mentors that we had in the program, or even the other people who were going through it, to comb through our financials and be like, you need to structure things this way. You need to hit these certain points here. You need to do this here. And it was basically 6 months of us going through business school in essence.
Yeah.
And Rachel and I took on different sides of the load. We're comparing notes back and forth. And so it was very, very instrumental in us being able to make sure that whatever we were setting up, even though we started this in 2016, our programming started, the cafe didn't open until 2017, but even in 2018, we were still young enough and early enough in that process that everything was still very fluid.
Yeah.
We're still trying to put those best practices in place on the fly.
Yeah.
I think the Miller Center's program really, really helped us to be able to just refine that and have other people to come around us to make sure that we're really setting ourselves up for long-term stability and success.
First of all, that's really reassuring to hear that you got that takeaway from Miller Center. And then from what I remember, your mentors was it Julie Betwee and Louis Jordan, who also has an amazing career in the coffee industry. Do you still keep in touch with any of your mentors at Miller, or anybody at Miller Center?
It's been a little bit since I've been in touch with them, but definitely during the pandemic. In late 2019, early 2020, Rachel had moved on. She was moving to Colorado. And we had hired a collection of staff, administrative staff, to help kind of take on some of those roles, to do some of the different administrative functions in a professional sense. And of course, during the pandemic, we went from 34 employees with 8 administrative staff down to myself and 2 baristas.
Wow.
So suddenly I was in charge of running and facilitating all of our administration, from our books to our fundraising to HR, everything. And so at that point, when I was looking for resources, looking for people to reach out to, I'm just like, I need a ton of knowledge. I need a ton of information. I'm willing to admit what I don't know in this moment to try to help this organization navigate through the pandemic and get out on the other side. And so I reached out to Louis. I reached out to different members of the staff at the Miller Center. And I'm just like, this is where I'm at. This is what I need. Help. And there were so many resources, from the accounting firm that we use today to like so many things, so many people that came alongside. One, sometimes even just telling me like, hey, you're going to make it. Relax. Like what you're experiencing, a lot of people have experienced before, in the sense of not knowing how to navigate these crises and these challenges. But we're here to help you, here to provide resources. And so in that crucial moment, our mentors and other staff at the Miller Center were a huge source of knowledge. Even though we hadn't spoken some in maybe a year, immediately when I reached out, it was just like a flood of necessary resources kind of came through. So
glad to hear that. That's literally why we exist, is to provide that network and those resources. So I'm glad that was there for you. But you said a few things. So you went from, like you and Rachel as founders, these visionary founders, and then growing to having this beautiful team doing different admin, to whittling back down to a team of just you and a couple baristas. How is your leadership skills, how have they evolved through that journey?
Yeah. Oh, goodness. A lot. I think some of it has, being able to have a different way of looking at having vision and foresight. I think when we first started 1951 Coffee, there was a lot of things we didn't know. And, there are things that we did. I mean, we grew to 34 employees because every opportunity that came in front of us, we're like, we have to jump at this opportunity because it will never come again. And so we latched onto this one and latched onto that one. And a lot of our growth in our early days were growth in response to things just happening around us. And I think the pandemic reminded me and taught me a lot that you have to have a vision that's beyond your current circumstances, and you can't be responding to it. Because I think everything in the pandemic probably would have told us, shut it all down, close it down. Politically, working with refugees is not the right thing to do right now. Working in direct food service to people is not the right thing to do right now. doing DoorDash deliveries and stuff like that of coffee is not practical. Just shut it all down and do whatever. But I think, working through that crisis and realizing, having a vision beyond that of, the coffee industry will still be there in a few months, in a few years. It'll look different, but it'll still be there. Yeah. People will still be fleeing war and conflict and violence. There will still be these needs in place. And so kind of helped me to develop that perspective beyond the current situation. Now, obviously, it was trying to resist and survive a crisis. But I think coming out of that, our organization basically started all over again. However, we started all over again with 5 years of knowledge, of understanding of mistakes and successes that we could then use into the next 5 years that we've been building since 2020. And a lot of that has been learning to say no to really great opportunities because they don't align with our long-term vision or the long-term scope of what we want to accomplish. Because sometimes, the opportunity will pass and that's what needs to happen. Exactly. Like good opportunity needs to go by because a better opportunity is something you're working towards.
Yeah, I think that's such a key component of being a really strong leader is taking that long-term vision, like you just said, and really looking at what the purpose is here. And so getting out of like what's going on right now to where is this going to lead? While also being just a social entrepreneur, you have to take the long-term vision. You just have to because you're in it for sustainability purposes.
Right.
So it's kind of by definition. You also said something about learning how to say no. What are some things that you had to say no to, or at the time you're like, oh, I don't know, but looking back, that was the right call?
Coming out of the pandemic, we actually were able to navigate it and come out in a very solid financial position in order to relaunch our first cafe, to grow it, to build it to new financial heights. And about a year and a half into kind of the post-pandemic UC Berkeley students arriving back, someone came and were like, hey, we have a cafe we built during the pandemic and we invested a ton of money into it, but we ran out of money and we just needed to offload it to someone. Do you want to take this over? And I think prior to the pandemic, we probably would have been like, we have to do this. Like it's an entire cafe, fully built up, brand new, beautiful. But immediately I began to ask questions that prior to the pandemic, I never would have asked. Things like, why? How many customers do you have? How have you gotten in this situation? Like what were the things that led to this? How long is your lease that you are trying to get us to jump in and take over for you? How much are you paying? What does it include? Like all of these details that prior to the pandemic, I wouldn't really have known to go through it with that fine-tooth comb, and ultimately to be able to identify enough red flags to be like, if I take over this opportunity, it actually could put at risk all of the successes that we've had in reestablishing our cafe and the firm foundation we have coming out of the pandemic. And I don't want to risk our financial stability to jump at this opportunity that in the end, I don't know if it has enough promise missionally and enough promise from a business perspective to really be worth that type of a risk.
So you're glad it was a good decision.
And in the end, I think, I think it was a great decision. I haven't regretted it since then. I still see that space when I go by and another coffee company has taken it over.
Is it in Berkeley or is it?
It's in Oakland.
What about when it comes to fundraising? Has there been a moment where you had to just kind of say no to funding, even though maybe that was what you needed, but you just were like, no, this isn't the right time? Have you had any instances like that?
Yeah. So actually not too long after coming out of the Miller Center's program, we were connected with a lot of different people. So within the social enterprise space, you of course have nonprofits, you have for-profit social enterprises, and then you have ones that have blended models. And I remember fairly early on after finishing the process of going through the Miller Center, we talked to a bunch of different potential funders. And there was one who was basically willing to give us a significant amount of money if we would take what we're doing now and make it for profit. And I remember going through the challenges of wrestling with, do we want to have this as a for-profit social enterprise, nonprofit, half and half? What do we want to do? And at the end of the day, we decided to keep it as a nonprofit. And a lot of that was around the idea that we are working with people, with individuals, people who are, a part of what we encourage and grow our business off of is the stories of people who are here, people who have been through immensely challenging things to get here. And encouraging people to frequent our business because of those stories. And I think the thought and idea is that we would provide someone else who's not working day in and day out here with a financial gain because of those stories being told was something that we just did not feel comfortable with. We didn't feel that was right for someone who didn't have that experience, and someone who didn't, again, wasn't involved in the daily lives of our staff, to benefit from that in that way as a silent, kind of distant person. And so we decided to turn that down. and keep it as a nonprofit so that we can always ensure that whatever is going on here, whatever is happening here is always for the benefit of the staff who are here or the community that they come from.
That's amazing. So you've never strayed from your mission, which is supporting this like specific community of people, which is, I think, very cool. Walk us through 1951 Coffee's business plan. So you're a nonprofit. So how do you earn revenue? Or is it all grant based, or like, what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah. So right now, about 70% of our revenue comes from the cafe. So the cafe includes all direct sales to customers who are coming in eating drinks and pastries and that kind of stuff. It also includes our online store where people can buy merchandise, coffee beans. We have coffee bean subscriptions for offices. We also do wholesale. Some of our graduates have opened their own cafes and we wholesale coffee to them as well. And then a couple of smaller partner cafes as well that they get coffee from us. And so that's where about 70% of our revenue comes from, is from all of those sales and that kind of business enterprise. About the other 30% comes through contributed revenue. The vast majority of that in the past has come through private foundations. We've typically steered clear of government grants. Not necessarily federal government grants were often quite available for working in the refugee sphere prior to this last year.
A lot of those, prior to last year.
Yeah, but part of the reason that we always avoided those is a lot of the agencies that we partner with are also getting those grants.
Oh, I see.
And so if we were receiving that grant, they were receiving that grant, they couldn't make referrals to us.
Gotcha.
And for us to be able to make an increase and an influence within the refugee resettlement sector, we didn't want to tap into the same resources that they are tapping into so that we could actually exponentially increase the effectiveness of those resources already. And so we mainly relied on private foundations and then building individual donors and major gifts as a part of our strategy. Since the pandemic, we've been working more and more on even stepping a little bit further away from private foundations. We find that, private foundations will give significant amounts to help you through a year, 2 years, 3-year, projects. And then they kind of pull back and they want you to kind of move to the next person. And so working with individuals and major gifts, we find that year over year, when you're working with individuals, they tend to give with more sustainability. As long as you are accomplishing the mission that you're set out to do, and they feel like they're a part of that, they continue to give and continue to contribute. And so we've been working on kind of maturing toward a model where we have a larger pool of individual donors who are contributing to what we do, so that we don't have those huge gaps in 2 to 3 years where someone pulls out $20,000 and you have that hole to fill with another foundation and another funders.
Yeah. Have you been indirectly impacted by the USAID shuttering at all? Have you felt that repercussion?
I think I don't know, it's kind of like one of those little puzzles where you're trying to build the picture by sliding around the pieces of the puzzle, right? Because it's like whenever funding is cut off in one place, everybody shifts to try to fill it. So, because a lot of times also, funding that would come through federal government would come through state government, would pass down to county government. So every time that shifts, if the federal government pulls out, then the state pulls out, the county pulls out. So then all the agencies that were previously, like especially the resettlement agencies that were largely federally funded, sometimes even like 90% of their programming would be federally funded, have been massively hit in their ability to provide additional resources to the refugee and immigrant community. So they've been tapping into private foundations, individual donors. And so as they do that, the resources in those areas deplete. And so then we have to shift and focus. And so directly, we have not been affected by it, but we are seeing that international and national partners that we work with and rely on for this kind of system of refugee protection is definitely being threatened and making everything more difficult, making it harder, simply because there are many, many less safety nets from the international starting point until here.
Yeah. I mean, we're also just trying to navigate this right now. Like we're not directly impacted, but we're indirectly feeling the repercussions. Right. And a lot of our enterprises are now just starting to feel this, especially our enterprises that are working directly in East Africa, for example. I was just in Kenya this past spring, and I found out that 70% of the nurses in Kenya were being funded through USAID. Wow. So you can imagine the impact now.
Well, and a lot of times also agriculture projects are funded through USAID in many countries, many coffee producing countries. The stability of the coffee industry is highly affected by, people being able to have, studies and things that show them the best practices as the climate changes, right? USAID was helping to fund a lot of projects that make coffee more sustainable and more available to us.
Sourcing your beans from.
We always have one from Ethiopia. That's always kind of something. We really like Ethiopian coffees. Right now we have a coffee from Guatemala. Actually, our training program manager is from Guatemala, and the coffee is from her hometown. She actually knows some of the people who provide that coffee. And then right now we have a decaf from Peru, and then we have two blends that we keep on tap. I think one of them has like a Brazil-Colombia blend, and then another that I can't recall right off. But yeah, those are the two. They have two blends. One we use for our batch brew, and then another we use for espresso.
All right, so let's talk coffee. What is your perfect cup of coffee?
Perfect cup of coffee. I do. I drink too much coffee.
Are you a tea drinker? No. Which would be hilarious.
I drink a lot of coffee every day. Whenever we come in, one of the first things that we do in the cafe, and we all actually enjoy it quite a lot, is we dial in the espresso. So every day when we're making our espresso, we're refining the recipe every single day. And so probably the first 4 or 5 drinks of coffee or tasting the espresso in the morning. Yeah. And then after that, I typically, because I've already had so much espresso, I typically from that point will drink a latte. So,
so you just said you have 6 shots of espresso and then a latte?
Sometimes. I mean, I don't usually drink, so usually we usually divide those 6 shots among all of us. So it's not 6 straight shots of coffee. But yes, I do have quite a bit. And then I typically, after my latte, I'll have drip coffee kind of throughout the day.
More than 3 cups.
I probably have 4 to 5 cups a day.
Per day. Wow.
All considered. But I still sleep well at night. So,
that was going to be my follow-up question. Like, how do you sleep?
I'm not sure it affects me anymore. It's a part of my body's expectations for the day now, I guess.
For somebody that is thinking about opening up a coffee cafe, like what would be your piece of advice to them?
Well, especially if you're doing it as a nonprofit social enterprise, do not compromise on anything. When it comes to coffee quality, when it comes to business standards, your mission is not necessarily your marketing tool per se. Yeah. Your mission is not, that may be the reason that someone comes to you the first time they hear about what you're doing and they're like, oh, I want to help, I want to do whatever. But at the end of the day, they're going to continue to come if they can do that and get an amazing cup of coffee, a really high quality cup of coffee. And I think at the same time for us, missionally, being able to provide a dignified working position requires us saying, no, we want to have the best quality coffee, the best quality customer experience for our staff to work in that environment where they have an amazing interaction and an amazing opportunity to connect with the community over something that is valued, shows respect to the farmers that put all the hard work in getting it here with quality, so we can deliver it with quality to the customers as well.
As the leader, how do you withhold that mission? Like, how do you ingrain having that mission and that purpose to your staff and your team?
I think a lot of it is doing it with joy, finding joy in making coffee and doing it well. But also what that means is when there are mistakes, when there are challenges, when someone's trying to pour beautiful latte art and it spills everywhere on the counter, like literally don't cry over spilled milk. Like literally just taking so much joy in, what happened in their attempt to make it, clean it up, make it, serve it again, redo it, and not going through the stress of, you have to do it right the first time. You have to get it right to the customer the first time. We are just making a cup of coffee at the end of the day, and that the person who's doing it and the customer who's receiving it is more valuable than the product in between, while still working on, going back, doing it again, emphasizing that there are second chances, third chances, fourth chances to get it right. And so, that has been a big core of making sure that we maintain that coffee and coffee quality is fun and enjoyable and not something to stress out, to maybe use some of the harder discipline tools of, you made a mistake, now you have to pay for making that mistake, or however that would look like.
I think that's cool, just acknowledging we're all human and giving each other that grace. And like you said, finding that joy in the everyday. But what about the days when things just aren't going right and you don't feel like being a leader, you don't feel like being a CEO, and yet you still have to show up for these people? What do you have to tell yourself, or how do you get into that mindset?
I think some of it is in spending time with my team, with my staff. I come in here each day because I am inspired by our staff. I'm inspired by what it has taken for them to show up every single day. I compare it to a lot of the things that I have to navigate to show up. Sure, there are things in my life that have been hard, that have been challenging, but at the same time, I'm working alongside people who have been through very, very difficult times. And I even go back to, when we were in the pandemic, and I remember one day blankly staring out when there are no customers coming. All UC Berkeley students were gone. And I think one of my staff members sensed that I was just feeling like really, really down. And he just said, Doug, it's like when I was trying to get here. It's like every time I felt like I had hit the end, I would turn a corner and God would remind me that there's still another step forward. There's still another way forward. And he's like, every time I hit that wall, there was still a way forward. And like when I, in talking to him, it took him almost 10 years to get here. And so to think that he had the resiliency to keep taking that, turning the next corner, turning the next corner. So I think even when I'm going through those challenges, like I'm surrounded by a group of people that are immensely encouraging, immensely resilient, and provide tons of support, to me, even in leadership. They make it very, very easy to lead.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I was like almost going to shed a tear. So at this stage in your leadership journey, if you had to give it a title, what would you call it?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I don't know what title I would give it. I guess a theme that I would give it. Yeah, I think if I were trying to give it a theme is to always remain flexible, to be very firm in your perspective and what you're attempting to accomplish, but be very flexible in the ways that you get there. Understanding that the path that you may lay out may not be as straightforward as you think. And so I think that would be the thing. It's just like remaining clear on what your purpose is, but remain flexible in how you get there.
I like that. I like that a lot.
So
when you're not saving the world with, beautiful quality coffee, how are you spending your time? Or is this it?
No, this is not. Sometimes it feels like it's all of my life. I think any entrepreneur would probably say that. But no, I mean, whether it's, with team members I have here or whatever, I mean, I still love playing soccer. I still play soccer.
Okay.
I watch soccer a lot. It probably takes way too much of my time, but I really, really love it. I play in one of the Berkeley adult leagues, and I also support Liverpool and Barcelona. So weekends I'm watching that. I also love outdoors. Second home is probably Yosemite. I'm there as often as I can, going to the Sierras, hiking, camping, that kind of stuff.
Do you have a favorite trail in Yosemite?
I have a couple of places. So I've been there enough that I've kind of begun to kind of navigate off the trails and kind of the backcountry some and do some orienteering where you're just kind of like looking at maps and navigating to different areas. And so I have a couple of places that I really like to go. One area is kind of well-known areas near Cathedral Peak. It's just kind of in the high country. It's just a beautiful kind of, place to be. And so
I guess what books or podcasts are you currently listening to? Or is there a certain book that stands out? I know we're talking about one in particular earlier, but if there's anything that you like, it doesn't have to be related to this. It could just be anything that speaks to you.
I think a lot of obviously, doing the work that I do around, refugees, there's a lot that I'm paying attention to and reading in the news, trying to keep up with the news. I often tend to listen to podcasts or read stories that also just focus on, justice in America in general. Follow a lot of what has happened with organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative and Brian Stevenson. And I think it just kind of reminds me to, as I'm working with people and inviting them into the United States and providing, a way for them to transition into life here, realizing that, this country is susceptible to a lot of the same things that, force people to flee their homes. And so while I'm working on providing a safe welcome for people on this end, I also need to make sure and be doing work and listening to things that educate me on, things that I didn't grow up understanding when I was living in Tennessee and about the landscape of the United States and how to make this a more just society that can then ultimately welcome people in and provide that stability long term. And that's kind of where I tend to focus is on things like that, because it also just gives me another perspective to think about outside of the immediate work that I'm doing.
Very cool. If folks want to get a hold of you and learn more about 1951, what are all the handles?
So at 1951 Coffee is our handle on Instagram. Of course, we're on, LinkedIn and Facebook. That's probably the easiest way to just keep up. I mean, Instagram is what we update the most. So if people want to just know what's happening at the cafe, what we're advocating for within the world of refugees and refugee resettlement, that's where we're most active. And then at the same time, we have some different opportunities through our training program where people can come and be mock customers at open houses and stuff. So those are usually announced through our newsletter. So if someone goes to our website, which is 1951coffee.com, they can register for our newsletter. They also get 20% off of their first purchase if they register for the newsletter. And then if there are other things through our website, there are some different spaces where people can fill out little info things if they just want to learn more about volunteering, what we do, donating to 1951 Coffee, or getting in touch with us for some types of partnerships and things like that. We have a little pop-up coffee stuff that we do from time to time. We'll be at San Francisco Coffee Festival in November.
That's cool.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways people can connect with us and get involved.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.